One would think that illicit trade in tobacco actually hurts the tobacco industry. Yet, you allege that this is not the case. This is actually, they are actually part of the players in illicit. How does this work?
Okay. Firstly, where does the evidence that the major multinational tobacco companies are involved in the illicit trade? That comes from their own documents. During court cases when the tobacco companies were being sued by people who got sick and by the government, the United States Ministry of Justice, as part of the discovery process, they released documents. And these documents are available on the internet, and just do a search of the internet and put the word smuggling multinational tobacco companies, and you'll see internal documents of the cigarette companies showing how they supported smuggling. Now, why should they support smuggling of their own? Surely that undercuts their own profits. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And they do it for two main reasons. When governments increase the price of cigarettes through taxation, more people stop smoking. So the tobacco companies want cigarettes to remain cheap. And so they support smuggled cigarettes. Now, if a tobacco company sells cigarettes to a smuggler or to a legal buyer, it sells it at the same price. They make the same profits. They don't care who they sell it to, as long as they make their profits. So that's the first thing. They get the same amount of money. The people who are cheated are the government, where the smugglers don't pay taxes, whereas the legal people would. So it's the government that's losing, not the tobacco companies. And then the other reason why they do it is because it puts pressure on government not to pass regulations. So when the UK, when Australia, now South Africa, we're talking of introducing what is called plain packaging. This is packaging which has got big health warnings that tells people that smoking causes all these diseases and that smoking can kill you. Obviously, the tobacco industry doesn't want it. So one of the arguments against any regulation, it'll increase smuggling. Don't increase excise taxes. It'll increase smuggling, and that will mean more corruption, that will mean organized crime. But really, the people behind it are the cigarette companies themselves. And the European Union has actually reached a settlement with the tobacco companies, where the tobacco companies have agreed to pay, I think it's a region of 12 billion euros to settle cases against them about them smuggling cigarettes into the EU.
Is tobacco industry a threat to development on the continent?
Oh, that was this year's World No Tobacco Day theme. It is a threat to development. We've talked about it. Children not going to school, patients not going to hospitals, farmers getting sick, smokers dying, and you know when people die, you know, the workforce is reduced, I mean, and you know when people are sick, they don't attend to their daily chores like they would normally do. So it's a whole multitude of effect on development. And that's why the FCTC is now enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals, because achieving the FCTC will have a great impact on global development.
Let me add to that. Assume I'm a smoker and I buy cigarettes every day and I spend money on it. Okay, supposing I spend $3 or $4 on it, depending on the country. That means there's $3 or $4 less to spend on food in my house. And we find that smoking, and smokers will do this, instead of buying food and clothes and educating their children, will spend more money on themselves. And there we say smoking actually perpetuates intergenerational poverty. The children suffer for the sins of the father.
I traveled once and I don't know, with Europe, somewhere in Europe, and there's an introduction of an e-cigarette. You know, I think the cigarette companies are moving with time, with technology, whereby you have a cigarette that it's smokeless, first of all, and I believe it doesn't even use tobacco, and it's colorless. You know, you can smoke it. You can smoke it here without affecting anybody. Do you think that's a viable, a cleaner cigarette?
Yusuf, can you go on that one?
Well, firstly, the e-cigarette is problematic in many countries. So, for instance, you can't smoke an e-cigarette in an aeroplane. they don't allow it because it still emits dangerous chemicals. Not as many as a cigarette, but it does. But I think there's other things about the e-cigarette that you mentioned. This morning I was watching the news and they talked about electric cars. And they said in the next 20 years, all cars will be electric, we won't be using petrol anymore. So what happens to the producers of petrol? They're going to look at a future in which certainly the automobile industry will not be using petrol anymore. And the same is true for tobacco farmers. The e-cigarette has nicotine in it, but it does not have tobacco. And as e-cigarette use takes off, and the multinational tobacco companies are all now moving to market e-cigarettes. In fact, one of them is actually saying we want people to stop smoking cigarettes and start using e-cigarettes. What is going to happen to tobacco farmers? That tobacco that they're going to grow, there's no longer going to be a market for it because everybody else, most people are going to be using e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are controversial. They are not as harmful as an ordinary cigarette because they contain fewer than the 6,000 chemicals in ordinary cigarettes, but they are still harmful. The analogy I use is if you smoke cigarettes, you're jumping out of the 20th story of a building. If you use e-cigarettes, you're jumping out of the 3rd floor of a building. It might be less dangerous than 20, but certainly still more dangerous. I don't want to jump out of any floor.
And for countries like ours, for the youth, it's like an initiation. You know, they will start from there, and then normally end up switching to real cigarettes.
Okay. Okay. Finally, I want to talk about your advice to youth, because as we just discussed, countries have taken measures in order to combat advertising of cigarettes, but there is still, sublime, I call it sublime advertising, whereby, the brands are still there through events, through clothing, through what you call brand stretching. You talked about that. What should youth be? And then it's trendy. Youth may see this is the trendy thing to do. You have cigarettes, but then you have other issues like shisha. What's your message out there? How should kids, how should youth conduct themselves and beware of these sublime advertising in order to ensure that they don't smoke?
I think what we need is a good law. Because if you have a good law, you won't be seeing these things. You talked about going to Europe. Go to UK. You'll never see cigarettes displayed. They are in a cabinet. It's only written cigarette. And sometimes with prices. I wanted to ask one guy that I'm used to. I normally sometimes visit there. And I said, can I see what is in the cupboard? And he said, madam, I'm not allowed to. You just say the brand you want, and I will sell it to you. So children, if they don't see, they won't be tempted. So if a good law is there, we talk about a comprehensive ban on advertising. And that means no brand stretching, no point of sale advertising, no internet, not in the newspapers. So that visual attraction will not be there. And then if you don't have smoking in public places, if you restrict the smoking, actually that also helps the smoker, because imagine, I remember when I was studying in UK, the pubs, they would be all white, full of smoke. Now these days, if one is down there, they got to go up and light and come down. Imagine when it is winter, they are struggling, to light up. So if you reduce those chances, the non-smokers are not encouraged to start, but even smokers are encouraged to quit. So if you reduce those chances, then, and of course with advocacy, because if you look around in Tanzania, there's very little smoking amongst the adults, and that is because of our advocacy. But the youth are picking up because of these adverts, because of the promotions, because of the sponsorship. Maybe Yusuf, you could add something more?
Final word.
Yeah, one of the greatest challenges we face in Africa is making sure that young girls and women don't start smoking. Because we know in Africa it's mostly men who smoke and women don't smoke. How will the tobacco companies target African women? The only way they can do it is through advertising. making smoking appear a Western, glamorous, smart, intelligent thing to do. Now, we've got a counter campaign which we run in the schools in South Africa, and we ask our kids, and the young people, not kids, and we say to them, spending 10,000 rands a year to kill yourself with cancer and heart disease is clever or stupid? Needing something to suck instead of a dummy is grown up or babyish. We have to target our messages to young people so they understand them, and the social media and your programs need to help us get out to young people that really it's a very old-fashioned and stupid thing to do.
And on that note, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank my guests, former Executive Director of the National Council Against Smoking in South Africa, who is board member of the African Tobacco Control Alliance, Dr. Yusuf Saluji, and Executive Director of Tanzania Tobacco Control Forum, Lutgard Kokulinda Kagaruki. Join me same time, same place for more of the agenda.